Good evening. Welcome to our fifth and final story in the Shire Chronicles, The Last Keeper. Let's begin. The faint glow of Cyrana's lantern barely pierced the thick darkness of the sanctuary's depths, casting flickering reflections on the rippling surface of the mirror of memory. Orlen felt the cold stone beneath his boots, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and ancient moss. The shadows at the edge of the chamber shifted unnervingly, their forms fluid and ungraspable, but his attention was drawn to the mirror, where his own face stared back at him, distorted and trembling with each ripple. Behind him, Adric stood steady, his staff glowing faintly with the soft blue light that seemed to resonate with the chamber's ancient carvings, while Cyrana's sharp gaze moved across the runes etched into the walls. "This place is alive," she muttered, her voice low but resolute. "The Keeper's power lingers here, but so does something darker, something watching." Orlen's heart raced as he glanced over his shoulder toward Calen, who stood frozen near the archway, his pale face barely visible in the dim light. "Why isn't it attacking?" Orlen whispered, his voice trembling. Cyrana turned, her blade resting lightly in her hand, her expression unreadable. "The sanctuary repels it," she said. "But not for long. If we don't act, this place will collapse under the weight of its presence." The chamber seemed to breathe, the walls pulsing faintly as though responding to Cyrana's words. The carvings that adorned the stone began to shimmer brighter, their intricate patterns weaving stories Orlen could not decipher. The walls seemed to whisper faintly, the words unintelligible yet heavy with meaning. He felt the ring in his pocket grow warm again, its steady pulse aligning with the energy in the room. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice tight. Cyrana stepped forward, her fingers brushing over the surface of the mirror. "This pool is a conduit," she said. "The keepers used it to unlock their secrets, to protect what was sacred. If we're to find answers, this is the key, but it demands something from us in return." Adric frowned, his staff's light dimming slightly. "What kind of something?" Cyrana didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the water. "The truth," she said. "It reveals what you hide, what you fear. It forces you to confront yourself before it will give anything in return." Orlen's stomach twisted, and he took a step back. "And if we don't want to confront it?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Cyrana turned to him, her eyes piercing. "Then we leave, and the shadows take everything we've worked for." A low hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone and sending ripples across the pool's surface. The carvings on the walls grew brighter, the symbols shifting as though alive, and the air grew colder. "It's deciding," Cyrana said, her voice almost a whisper. "It knows we're here." Orlen clenched his fists, his mind racing. He thought of Greenhill Vale, of his quiet burrow and the garden he had left behind. He thought of the stone that had started this journey, of the shadows that had pursued him across the land. And now, standing in the heart of the Keeper's sanctuary, he realized there was no turning back. "I'll go first," he said suddenly, his voice louder than he intended. Cyrana raised an eyebrow but stepped aside, motioning for him to approach the mirror. "Be prepared," she said. "It will show you what you need to see, not what you want to see." Orlen knelt by the edge of the pool, the water's surface trembling as his breath brushed over it. Slowly he reached out, his fingers grazing the cold liquid. The instant he made contact, the world around him shifted. The sanctuary faded away, replaced by a vivid vision of Greenhill Vale, but it was not as he remembered. The hills were barren, the trees lifeless and the streams dried up. His home was there, but its windows were shattered, the door hanging loosely from its hinges. He stepped toward it, his chest tight with dread, and as he reached the threshold, a voice stopped him. "This is what remains," the voice said, deep and resonant, but not unkind. Orlen turned, but there was no one there, only the empty landscape stretching endlessly before him. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice shaking. The voice echoed around him. "The past cannot protect you. The future depends on what you choose." As the vision shifted again, Orlen saw a figure standing in the distance, cloaked in shadow. It raised a hand, and suddenly the barren landscape began to collapse, the hills crumbling into ash and the streams flowing backward in unnatural spirals. "You carry more than you know," the voice continued. "You have the power to change what is to come, but only if you face it." Orlen felt the weight of the ring in his pocket grow heavier, its warmth pulsing like a second heartbeat. He stepped forward, his breath hitching as the figure in the distance turned to face him. It was himself, or something that bore his likeness. Suddenly the vision dissolved, and Orlen was back in the sanctuary, gasping for breath. Cyrana caught his arm, steadying him. "What did you see?" she asked. Orlen shook his head, unable to form the words. Something I don't understand," he managed at last. Before Cyrana could press further, the hum grew louder and the pool began to glow, its light filling the chamber. Adric and Calen stepped back, their faces pale as shadows began to stir once more at the edges of the room. Cyrana turned to the others, her voice firm. "The mirror has opened," she said. "It's time." The mirror's glow pulsed brighter, filling the chamber with an otherworldly light that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The carvings on the walls shimmered, their patterns weaving together like veins of light threading through the stone. Cyrana's eyes were fixed on the rippling surface of the pool, her blade resting in one hand as her other hovered above the water. Orlen stood nearby, his chest heaving as he recovered from the vision that had shaken him to his core. Adric moved closer, his staff glowing faintly, casting long shadows that danced across the walls. "What do we do now?" Adric asked, his voice quiet but steady. Cyrana didn't answer immediately, her gaze locked on the mirror. "The sanctuary has accepted us," she said at last. "But the mirror isn't finished. It's calling for more." Her eyes flicked to Calen, who stood trembling near the entrance to the chamber, his face pale and drawn. "Calen," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "You're next." Calen recoiled, his back pressing against the cold stone of the archway. I can't," he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "You saw what it did to Orlen. I can't face that." Cyrana stepped toward him, her presence commanding. "You've been drawn here, just like the rest of us. The shadows won't stop chasing you until you understand why. The mirror will show you the truth, whether you're ready or not." Calen's eyes darted to Orlen, silently pleading for a reprieve, but Orlen could only nod, his own fear still fresh. "It's hard," Orlen said, his voice hoarse, "but it's the only way forward." With visible effort, Calen pushed himself away from the wall and stepped toward the pool. His hands shook as he knelt at its edge, the glow of the water illuminating his gaunt features. Slowly he extended his hand, his fingers trembling as they touched the surface. The chamber grew deathly silent, the only sound the faint hum of the mirror as Calen's reflection began to shift. Orlen watched intently, his breath catching as the water rippled and swirled, pulling Calen into its depths, not physically, but in a way that made it seem as though he was sinking into another world. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Calen gasped, his body stiffening as his eyes glazed over. The rippling water reflected a scene that seemed to shimmer like heat rising from stone. It was a vast, desolate plain, its surface cracked and dry, stretching endlessly toward a blood-red horizon. In the center of the scene stood a massive stone pillar, its surface carved with the same glowing runes that adorned the sanctuary walls. Around the pillar swirled dark figures, their forms shifting and indistinct, their movements like smoke caught in a gale. "The Pillar of Mourning," Cyrana murmured, her voice barely audible. Adric turned to her, his expression questioning. "You've seen this before?" Cyrana nodded, her eyes fixed on the reflection. "It's one of the Keeper's oldest legends, a place where their greatest secrets were hidden, guarded by shadows born from their own fears. It was said to hold the truth of their downfall." In the vision, Calen approached the pillar, his steps hesitant. The shadows parted as he drew near, though their movements grew more frenzied, their shapes distorting into monstrous forms. The closer Calen came, the brighter the runes on the pillar glowed, until they shone like stars against the desolate landscape. As he reached out to touch the stone, the vision fractured, splintering into 1,000 fragments before dissolving entirely. Calen collapsed onto the floor of the sanctuary, his breath ragged and his body trembling. "What did you see?" Cyrana asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. Calen shook his head, his hands gripping the edge of the pool as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. "I don't know," he whispered. "It was emptiness, fear, and that pillar. It felt alive, like it was pulling me toward it." He looked up at Cyrana, his eyes filled with desperation. "I don't want to go back there." Before anyone could respond, the chamber began to shake, the carvings on the walls glowing brighter with each passing moment. The shadows at the edges of the room grew bolder, their forms coalescing into something almost solid. Adric raised his staff, the light at its tip flaring as he stepped protectively in front of Orlen. "They're coming," he said, his voice tense. Cyrana drew her blade, her stance low and ready. "The mirror has awakened them," she said. "It's given us what it can, but now we have to defend it." The shadows surged forward, their movements unnaturally fast and fluid. Cyrana met the first with a swift strike, her blade flashing in the light of the mirror. The creature recoiled, its form unraveling like smoke, but more took its place, their shapes twisting and writhing as they closed in. Adric thrust his staff forward, a burst of light erupting from its tip and forcing the shadows back. Orlen stumbled toward the mirror, his hand instinctively clutching the ring in his pocket. Its warmth grew intense, almost burning, as if it were urging him to act. "What do we do?" Orlen shouted, his voice nearly drowned out by the sound of the battle. Cyrana parried another attack, her blade slicing through a shadow as she answered. "The mirror gave us the path," she said. "The Pillar of Mourning, that's where we'll find the answers. We have to get out of here and find it before the shadows overwhelm us." Calen scrambled to his feet, his fear momentarily forgotten in the chaos. "There's a way out," he said, his voice frantic. "Another passage. It's marked by the same runes as the ones in my vision." Cyrana nodded, her movements swift and precise as she cut down another shadow. "Lead the way," she said. "We'll cover you." As Calen ran toward the far side of the chamber, the others followed, their movements coordinated despite the chaos. Orlen felt the weight of the ring pressing against his chest as they moved, its warmth pulsing in time with the glow of the mirror. The shadows closed in around them, their screeches echoing through the sanctuary, but the group pressed on, their steps resolute. Finally, they reached a narrow passage, its entrance carved with the same glowing runes that had appeared in the vision. Calen hesitated for only a moment before plunging into the darkness beyond. Cyrana and Adric followed, their weapons ready, while Orlen cast one last glance at the mirror. Its glow had dimmed, but its presence lingered, as though watching them leave. Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the passage, the shadows at his heels. The narrow passage wound deeper into the earth, its walls smooth and cold, as if carved by hands long forgotten. The glowing runes etched into the stone pulsed faintly, their light guiding the group through the oppressive darkness. Orlen's breaths came in sharp gasps, his legs aching from the relentless pace, but the warmth of the ring in his pocket urged him forward. Behind him, Adric's staff cast a steady glow, its light illuminating Cyrana's determined expression and Calen's pale, sweat-slicked face. The shadows that had pursued them from the sanctuary seemed to falter at the threshold of the passage, their forms melting into the gloom, but the air remained heavy, charged with an uneasy tension. "This way leads us closer to the pillar," Cyrana said, her voice firm but low. "The sanctuary's power has held them at bay for now, but it won't last. We need to keep moving." Her gaze flicked to Calen, who stumbled slightly, his hand brushing the wall for balance. "Are you with us?" she asked sharply. Calen nodded, though his movements were sluggish, his eyes distant. "I'll manage," he muttered, his voice thin. Orlen glanced at him, concern flickering in his chest, but he said nothing. The passage opened into a vast cavern, its ceiling lost in darkness and its floor scattered with jagged rocks and ancient crumbling pillars. A cold wind swept through the space, carrying the scent of stone and distant water. In the center of the cavern stood a towering monolith, its surface carved with the same intricate runes that mark the sanctuary. The Pillar of Mourning loomed like a sentinel, its glow faint but steady, casting long shadows across the cavern. Orlen felt a chill run through him as he approached, the ring in his pocket pulsing in time with the light of the pillar. "This is it," Cyrana said, her voice almost reverent, "the heart of the Keeper's secrets." Adric stepped closer, his staff raised as he examined the carvings. "It's more than just a monument," he murmured. "It feels alive." Cyrana nodded. "The pillar is a nexus. The Keepers built it to anchor their power, to preserve what they feared the world would lose, but it's also a test." Her eyes turned to Orlen. "The relics are the key to unlocking its secrets. The ring, the stone, they brought us here for a reason." Orlen hesitated, his hand hovering near his pocket. The ring's warmth was almost overwhelming now, a steady pulse that seemed to resonate with the pillar itself. "And what happens when we unlock it?" he asked, his voice trembling. Cyrana's expression was unreadable. "We find the truth," she said simply. As Orlen stepped toward the pillar, a deep hum filled the cavern, the sound vibrating through the air and the stone beneath their feet. The runes on the monolith began to glow brighter, their light spreading outward in intricate patterns that seemed to ripple like water. Orlen drew the ring from his pocket, its dark metal surface gleaming in the light, and held it aloft. The pillar responded immediately, its glow intensifying as a beam of light shot out, connecting the ring to the carvings. A voice echoed through the cavern, deep and resonant, but neither male nor female. "The Keeper's legacy lies here," it said, the words vibrating in Orlen's chest. A truth hidden, a burden carried, a path forged anew. The light from the pillar spread outward, illuminating the cavern in brilliant detail. Figures began to take shape in the light, their forms ghostly but distinct. They were the keepers, tall, robed figures with solemn faces and eyes that seemed to pierce the veil of time. One of the figures stepped forward, its gaze fixed on Orlen. "You carry the relics of our making," it said, its voice layered with the weight of centuries. "And with them, you carry our burden. The world is unbalanced, fractured by time and greed. What you choose to do with this knowledge will shape what is to come." Orlen swallowed hard, his grip on the ring tightening. "I don't understand," he said. "Why me? I'm just a gardener from the Vale." The figure's expression softened, though its voice remained steady. "It is not who you were, but who you choose to become," it said. "The relics are not tools of power, but guides. They will lead you to what must be done, but the choices are yours alone." As the figure's words faded, the light of the pillar dimmed, and the ghostly forms began to dissolve. The cavern grew silent once more, but the weight of their presence lingered. Cyrana stepped forward, her eyes scanning the now dormant monolith. "The pillar has given us its message," she said. "The path ahead is ours to find." Before they could move, the air in the cavern shifted, growing colder and heavier. A deep rumble echoed from the passage behind them, and the shadows that had lingered at its edge began to surge forward, their forms more solid and menacing than before. "We're out of time," Adric said, his voice tight as he raised his staff. Cyrana drew her blade, her stance firm. "The path forward lies beyond the pillar," she said. "We have to move." As the group hurried toward an opening on the far side of the cavern, Orlen cast one last glance at the pillar. Its light had faded, but its presence felt stronger than ever, as though it were watching them leave. He felt the ring grow warm again, its pulse steady and reassuring, and he knew their journey was far from over. The passage on the far side of the cavern led upward, the air growing fresher with each step. When they finally emerged into the open air, the sky above was a deep, endless blue, the stars shimmering like diamonds scattered across velvet. The land stretched out before them, a vast expanse of rolling hills and dark forests, with mountains rising in the distance. Cyrana paused, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "This is only the beginning," she said. "The Keeper's secrets are scattered, and the shadows won't stop until they've claimed them all." Orlen took a deep breath, the weight of the ring in his pocket a constant reminder of the burden they now carried. "Then we keep moving," he said, his voice steady, one step at a time. As the group set off into the night, the faint hum of the pillar echoed in Orlen's mind, a quiet promise of the challenges and discoveries yet to come.